Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a time in life when you realize that not everything requires a response. We live in a world where everyone has something to say on the news, on social media, in our everyday lives. But wisdom knows the difference between when to speak and when to be silent. Emotions, powerful, unpredictable, and often overwhelming, are what make us human. They shape how we see the world, how we interact with others, and how we react in times of conflict or challenge. But there's a tricky side to emotions. They can also lead us astray if we don't learn to manage them. And the truth is, when your emotions are at their peak, that's the moment when silence becomes your most powerful ally. Think about it. You're in a heated argument. The tension is rising. Voices are getting louder. And your heart is pounding in your chest. You can feel your thoughts racing, ready to unleash every comeback, every sharp retort that will win the conversation. In that moment, your emotions have taken the wheel, and they're driving you straight into the heat of the fire. But let me tell you something: silence in these moments is not a sign of weakness. In fact, it's a sign of immense strength. It's a conscious choice to protect your peace. When emotions are high, words can become weapons. And once words are spoken, you can't take them back. The scars they leave might not be visible, but they run deep. Sometimes staying silent is the only way to prevent further damage, not only to the situation, but to yourself. Why do we feel the need to speak when we're angry or hurt? Often it's because we believe that expressing those emotions in the moment will make us feel better. We think that by saying what's on our mind, by letting the other person know exactly how we feel, we'll find relief. But the truth is, the relief is temporary. Once the dust settles, we're left with the aftermath of those words, and that's when regret creeps in. We've all been there. We've said something in the heat of the moment, and later wished we could rewind time and take it all back. Silence gives you that opportunity to avoid the regret before it even happens. When you choose silence, you give yourself a moment to breathe, to gather your thoughts, and to reflect on what's really going on. It allows you to step back from the situation and see it for what it truly is, rather than being swept up in the storm of your emotions. This moment of pause is where true power lies. Because here's the thing: emotions are temporary, but the impact of your words can last forever. Anger, frustration, hurt, they come and go like passing storms. But the words you speak in those moments of emotional intensity, they have the power to linger, to fester, and to cause long-term harm. Choosing silence allows you to separate yourself from the immediacy of your emotions. It gives you time to consider, is this worth saying? Will it help or will it hurt? When you stay silent, you're not just protecting the other person, you're protecting yourself. You're keeping your inner peace intact. In a world that's constantly demanding your reaction, your opinion, your response, silence is a radical act of self-preservation. It's saying, I refuse to let this situation control me. I choose my peace over the chaos. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a time to speak and there's a time to act. But when emotions are running high, more often than not, that's the time to pause, to let the intensity pass. Once you're calm, once you've had a chance to reflect, then you can decide how to move forward. That might mean having a conversation, but it will be one that's guided by clarity, not clouded by emotion. So the next time you feel your emotions rising, when you're on the verge of saying something you might regret, remember the power of silence. Give yourself that moment to breathe, to reflect, and to protect your peace. Because once the storm passes, you'll be grateful that you chose silence over chaos. Silence isn't about holding back or avoiding the truth. It's about choosing when and how to engage with the world. It's about knowing that not every moment requires a response, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to say nothing at all. Ignorance, one of the most frustrating and challenging obstacles we face in our daily lives. It comes in many forms: misinformation, prejudice, a refusal to listen or understand. We've all encountered it. You're having a conversation, maybe about something you're deeply passionate about, or a topic you know well, and suddenly Someone says something so uninformed, so misguided, that it feels like a slap in the face. Your instinct, you want to correct them, you want to argue, to educate, to show them the error in their thinking. But here's the hard truth: not everyone is ready to hear the truth. Not everyone is in a place where they're open to learning or willing to engage in a meaningful dialogue. And in those moments, silence becomes your greatest strength. Think about it. You can waste your energy trying to convince someone who isn't interested in understanding, or you can save yourself the frustration and choose silence. Ignorance isn't always something that can be fixed in a single conversation. Sometimes it's rooted in years of conditioning, in deeply held beliefs that won't be shaken by a few words, no matter how wise or well-intentioned they may be. Choosing silence in these moments doesn't mean you're giving up or conceding the point. It doesn't mean you don't care. In fact, it shows that you care enough about your own peace of mind to not waste it on an unproductive argument. Silence, in the face of ignorance, is a form of wisdom. It's recognizing that not every battle is worth fighting, and that not every opinion needs to be corrected. There's strength in knowing when to speak and when to hold your tongue. It's tempting, though, isn't it? To believe that if you just explain it the right way, if you just say the right thing, the other person will see the light. But let me tell you, there are some people who are so set in their ways, so convinced of their own perspective, that no amount of explanation will change their mind. In those cases, silence isn't just a choice, it's the best option. When you engage with ignorance, especially if the other person isn't truly listening, you give them power. You allow their misunderstanding, their refusal to learn, to affect your peace of mind. You get drawn into a cycle of frustration and futility. But when you choose silence, you retain your power. You stay in control. You're no longer reacting to their ignorance, you're rising above it. Now, I'm not saying you should stay silent in the face of injustice. There are times when we must speak out, when silence would be complicit in allowing harm to continue. But there's a difference between fighting for what's right and arguing with someone who refuses to understand. You've got to pick your battles. Not every disagreement requires your input, especially when the other person isn't willing to meet you halfway. Silence also gives you something invaluable: time. Time to observe, to reflect, and to assess whether or not engaging is truly worth it. It allows you to see the bigger picture. You might realize that the person you're tempted to argue with isn't actually seeking a dialogue, they're looking for validation of their own beliefs. Or maybe they're so wrapped up in their own perspective that no amount of discussion will change their mind. In these cases, silence isn't just the better option, it's the wiser one. There's something powerful in letting ignorance speak for itself. When you stay quiet, when you don't respond, you allow the other person's words to stand on their own. And often, in the absence of a rebuttal, those words reveal their own weakness. Ignorance can't stand on its own for long. It requires engagement to give it life. Without that, it withers. And here's the thing: sometimes your silence speaks louder than words ever could. When you choose not to engage with ignorance, you send a message that you won't be drawn into fruitless arguments. You show that you value your peace of mind more than the need to be right. And believe me, that kind of strength, knowing when to speak and when to stay silent, is something that people notice. Silence in the face of ignorance is not a retreat, but a stand. It's a refusal to waste energy on battles that don't deserve your attention. It's an acknowledgement that ignorance can't be defeated in every conversation, but it can be weakened by choosing not to fuel it. So the next time you encounter ignorance, ask yourself, is this worth my peace? Will my words truly make a difference? And if the answer is no, remember the power of silence. Because in that silence you stand strong. In a world that constantly demands quick responses and instant reactions, we often forget the power of pausing, of taking a moment to be still. In silence, we can observe what's truly happening around us and within us. Silence isn't just the absence of words, it's a space where clarity can emerge, where we can see situations for what they are, not just how they make us feel in the moment. Imagine this, you're in a tense conversation and things are escalating. The air is thick with tension, emotions are bubbling up, and all you want to do is fire back with your own words, your own defense. But instead of jumping into the storm, what if you chose to stay silent? What if, in that moment, you took a step back and allowed yourself to simply observe? That's the beauty of silence. It gives you the gift of perspective. When you stay silent, you give yourself room to breathe. You're no longer just reacting to the heat of the moment. You're watching, you're listening, and most importantly, you're thinking. In that space between action and reaction, between speaking and staying silent, you have the chance to gather your thoughts, to reflect on the situation, and to decide the best course of action. Too often we speak before we truly understand. We react out of impulse, out of emotion, without fully grasping the dynamics at play. And in those moments, our words can cause more harm than good. But when you choose silence, you're allowing yourself to see the full picture. You're observing not only what's being said, but how it's being said. You're watching body language, tone, and facial expressions, all of which can tell you far more than words alone. Silence helps you discern what's really going on beneath the surface. You start to notice things you might have missed if you were too busy reacting. Maybe you see that the person in front of you is not actually angry at you, but frustrated with something else. Maybe you realize that their words aren't about the present moment, but about something much deeper, something they've been carrying for a long time. Or maybe you discover that the situation doesn't even require your input at all, that sometimes just being present is enough. But silence isn't just about understanding others, it's also about understanding yourself. In moments of silence, you have the chance to check in with your own emotions. You can ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? What is it about this situation that's triggering me? Instead of reacting out of habit or defensiveness, you give yourself the opportunity to respond thoughtfully and intentionally. In a world that's constantly pushing us to react, to have the last word, silence is a radical act of strength. It's an acknowledgement that not every moment requires our input, and that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. And here's the beauty of it: when you allow yourself to observe rather than react, you gain control over the situation. You are no longer a passenger on the ride of emotions, you are the driver. You steer the conversation, the moment, the conflict, not with words, but with the power of restraint. You give yourself the space to act with intention rather than react with emotion. Because silence doesn't just allow you to see the world more clearly, it allows you to see yourself more clearly too. And in that clarity, you'll find the strength to not just react, but to truly respond. In a world that thrives on instant gratification, where responses are expected in the blink of an eye and reactions are measured in seconds, we often forget that true wisdom takes time to emerge. It doesn't rush, it doesn't scramble to be the first voice heard, it waits patiently in the quiet moments, gathering strength, clarity, and purpose. And that's why silence is so powerful. It gives wisdom the time and space to rise. Think about how often we're pressured to react immediately. In a conversation, we feel the need to respond the moment the other person stops speaking. In a disagreement, we rush to defend ourselves, to explain, to make our point. But when we react too quickly, we run the risk of speaking from a place of emotion rather than understanding. We end up saying things we don't mean, making decisions that aren't fully thought through, or offering advice that's based on impulse rather than insight. That's where silence comes in. Silence isn't about avoiding the conversation or being passive. It's about allowing space for deeper understanding. It's about giving yourself the time to let wisdom rise to the surface. Because wisdom doesn't operate on a timer. It needs reflection, contemplation, and patience. And silence gives it the room to breathe. When we pause and choose silence, something powerful happens. We allow our minds to slow down, to sift through the noise of emotions, ego, and confusion, and to focus on what truly matters. In that stillness, we start to see the bigger picture. We start to understand the situation not just from our own perspective, but from a broader, more compassionate one. we gain insight into what's driving the conversation, what's fueling the conflict, and what's really at stake. In silence, we can reflect on the consequences of our words and actions. We can ask ourselves, what impact will my words have? Am I speaking from a place of truth, or am I speaking from a place of reaction? This kind of introspection takes time. It's not something that can be done in an instant. And that's why silence is so valuable. It buys us the time we need to let wisdom catch up with our emotions. Let's be clear, silence doesn't mean indecision. And it certainly doesn't mean ignorance. It's the opposite. It's a conscious choice to wait until you can speak or act from a place of clarity, rather than from a place of confusion or haste. There's a certain humility in staying silent. It's recognizing that, in some moments, you don't have all the answers, and that's okay. It's better to wait and allow understanding to rise than to fill the silence with empty words or rash actions. Silence also opens the door for deeper listening. When you're not busy preparing your next response or defending your position, you're able to truly hear what's being said, not just the words, but the emotions and intentions behind them. You're able to absorb the full weight of the situation, to consider the other person's perspective, and to evaluate how your response will affect the outcome. This level of understanding only comes when you've given yourself time to listen and reflect. Wisdom doesn't speak over others, it listens first. Moreover, silence can act as a buffer between stimulus and response. It creates a gap where wisdom has the chance to intervene before emotions take the lead. In that gap, you have the opportunity to choose a wiser, more thoughtful response, instead of reacting in a way that might escalate the situation. It's in that space that you find the power to respond, not with knee-jerk reactions, but with measured, impactful words and actions. Think of all the times in life when you've been thankful for a moment of pause. Maybe it was before you sent that text, or before you responded in a heated argument. That pause, that moment of silence, is where wisdom begins to rise. It's in those moments that you realize silence was the wisest choice, and that by waiting you gained a better understanding of the situation. Wisdom doesn't rush. It unfolds in its own time, and silence is the soil in which it grows. And here's the most important thing about silence. It's not just about waiting for the right words. It's about waiting for the right understanding. Silence gives you the patience to see the truth clearly without the fog of immediate reaction. And once that wisdom rises, once you have clarity, your words will carry much more weight. They'll be rooted in thoughtfulness and insight rather than in haste or emotion. Next time you're in a situation where you feel pressured to respond quickly, remember the power of silence. Give yourself the gift of time. Let wisdom rise before you speak or act. Allow that silence to create the space for clarity, for understanding, and for wisdom to guide your actions. Because ultimately, silence isn't just about withholding words, it's about choosing the right ones. And when you give wisdom the time to rise, your silence transforms into strength, and your words become a reflection of your deepest understanding. Pride, it's a powerful force. It can push you to stand tall, to claim your place in the world, and to demand respect. But pride can also lead you into dangerous territory. It can tempt you to speak when silence would serve you better. There are moments in life when pride, if left unchecked, compels us to react, to assert ourselves, and to prove a point. But when pride calls you to speak, that's often the moment when silence is the most powerful answer. Think of those times when someone challenges you, when they question your abilities, your integrity, or your worth. Pride kicks in, and your first instinct is to defend yourself, to respond immediately with words that reestablish your position. You feel the need to say, "I'm right," or "You don't know what you're talking about." The urge to justify your actions or to defend your reputation rises in your chest, like a tidal wave, threatening to crash down on anyone who dares challenge you. But here's the truth. Not every challenge needs an answer. Not every insult, accusation, or disagreement requires you to speak up. Sometimes, in the face of pride's call, silence is the most dignified response. Silence says, "I don't need to prove myself to you." It says, I'm secure in who I am, and I won't let pride drag me into a battle of words. When you're driven by pride, you often speak not from a place of truth, but from a place of defensiveness. You're not focused on what's right, you're focused on winning the argument or protecting your ego. But when you choose silence in those moments, you're allowing yourself the space to see things clearly. You're acknowledging that your worth isn't determined by anyone else's opinion. And that speaking out of pride rarely leads to resolution, it only fuels the fire. Pride can be deceptive. It convinces you that if you don't respond, you'll be seen as weak, or that silence is a form of defeat. But the opposite is true. Silence in the face of pride takes immense strength. It shows self-control and wisdom. It's a declaration that your peace of mind is more important than your ego. Think about the last time you were in an argument and pride took over. Maybe it was with a colleague, a friend, or even a family member. In that heated moment, did speaking your mind actually resolve anything, or did it just escalate the tension? Did proving your point make you feel better, or did it leave you feeling drained even after you won the argument? Most of the time, when pride leads the conversation, it doesn't end with understanding, it ends with more division. But when you choose silence, you're making the conscious decision to disengage from the conflict. You're saying, this doesn't define me, and I refuse to let my pride dictate my actions. Silence gives you the opportunity to reflect, to ask yourself, is this battle worth fighting? What am I really trying to achieve here? More often than not, you'll find that the argument was never about the truth, it was about your pride. In silence, you gain clarity. You start to see that sometimes the best response is no response at all. Silence can diffuse a situation in ways that words cannot. It allows tempers to cool, it prevents you from saying something you'll later regret, and it preserves your dignity. In those moments, silence becomes your strength. But silence isn't just about avoiding conflict, it's about rising above it. When you refuse to let pride pull you into petty arguments, you're showing that you're bigger than the moment. You're not afraid of what others think because you know who you are. You don't need to prove your worth with words. Your actions, your character, and your integrity speak for themselves. When you choose silence, you allow the noise around you to fade away, and you create space for wisdom to enter. You're not speaking from a place of emotion or ego, you're responding with thoughtfulness and intention. That's where true strength lies, in knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. Silence in these moments isn't passive, it's active. It's a choice to rise above the urge to react, to let go of the need to be right, and to find peace in the fact that your worth is not up for debate. Silence doesn't mean you're backing down, it means you're choosing to stand firm in your truth, without the need for validation. Pride will always call you to speak, to defend, to prove. But when you master the art of silence in those moments, you master yourself. You show that you're not ruled by ego or the need for approval, but by a deeper understanding of your own value. So the next time pride calls you to speak, pause. Take a breath. Choose silence. Because in that silence you will find strength. In that silence you will find clarity. And in that silence you will rise above the noise. Pride, it's a powerful force. It can push you to stand tall, to claim your place in the world, and to demand respect. But pride can also lead you into dangerous territory. It can tempt you to speak when silence would serve you better. There are moments in life when pride, if left unchecked, compels us to react, to assert ourselves, and to prove a point. But when pride calls you to speak, that's often the moment when silence is the most powerful answer. Think of those times when someone challenges you, when they question your abilities, your integrity, or your worth. Pride kicks in, and your first instinct is to defend yourself, to respond immediately with words that reestablish your position. You feel the need to say, I'm right, or you don't know what you're talking about. The urge to justify your actions or to defend your reputation rises in your chest like a tidal wave, threatening to crash down on anyone who dares challenge you. But here's the truth, not every challenge needs an answer. Not every insult, accusation, or disagreement requires you to speak up. Sometimes, in the face of pride's call, silence is the most dignified response. Silence says, I don't need to prove myself to you. It says, I'm secure in who I am, and I won't let pride drag me into a battle of words. Pride can be deceptive. It convinces you that if you don't respond, you'll be seen as weak, or that silence is a form of defeat. But the opposite is true. Silence in the face of pride takes immense strength. It shows self-control and wisdom. It's a declaration that your peace of mind is more important than your ego. You gain clarity. You start to see that sometimes the best response is no response at all. Silence can diffuse a situation in ways that words cannot. It allows tempers to cool. It prevents you from saying something you'll later regret, and it preserves your dignity. In those moments, silence becomes your strength. But silence isn't just about avoiding conflict. It's about rising above it. When you refuse to let pride pull you into petty arguments, you're showing that you're bigger than the moment. You're not afraid of what others think because you know who you are. You don't need to prove your worth with words. Your actions, your character, and your integrity speak for themselves. When you choose silence, you allow the noise around you to fade away, and you create space for wisdom to enter. You're not speaking from a place of emotion or ego. You're responding with thoughtfulness and intention. That's where true strength lies, in knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. In these moments isn't passive, it's active. It's a choice to rise above the urge to react, to let go of the need to be right, and to find peace in the fact that your worth is not up for debate. Silence doesn't mean you're backing down. It means you're choosing to stand firm in your truth without the need for validation.